Hi everybody, it's Casey from Upcycled Island. And today I've got a little tutorial for you on how to make a skirt from shirt sleeves. I made this little skirt from 3 shirt sleeves. And so it fits me like a little A-line skirt. And I used the shoulder seams as the hem, and then where the cuffs were attached, the thin part of the sleeve, that is at the waist area. And so it makes a little A-line skirt. This one I used 3, and I used a 4th shirt to make the waistband. And I decided I wanted to make one a little bit fuller, so I'm going to make one using 4 shirts, well actually 5, one for the waistband. So there's some preparation we have to do first, and I want to show you what that is. The first thing we did was cut off the cuffs because we used the cuffs in another project. And the second thing we did was cut the sleeves off of the shirt, leaving the seam. Most men's shirts, well-made men's shirts, have flat-felled seams. Flat-felled seams. Say that a few times fast. And so we're going to use that flat-felled seam. So when we cut the sleeve off of the shirt, all we do is just cut it very close to the seam edge, the seam allowance edge, as smoothly as possible without cutting into the seam itself. Then the other thing we do in preparation is the button placket on the sleeve. We sew that closed. Just on the outside, we top stitched along the edge and then flipped it over, and on the other side, top stitched it closed. So this will stay closed. This is going to be up at the waist, so it needs to stay closed. And of course, we took the button off so it wouldn't interfere with closing this up. And there was one other thing I did in prep work, and that was simply to clean up the side seams. So I just took a ruler and made sure that these were straight. We're going to sew these together, and you want to put them pretty sides together. So this is the pretty side of this sleeve, and this is the pretty side. This is the pretty side, the right side of this sleeve. So I'm going to put those pretty sides together, right sides together, however you want to call it. And I'm going to match them up at this sleeve seam, this flat-felled seam. We're going to match those together. And then just pin or clip, whichever you choose. I'm going to use clips. Just clip this together. And you're just going to sew it down the side. We are back, and we have sewed all 4 seams. Now, you see that since we lined up from what was the shoulder seam, that the top, what is now the waist of our skirt, those don't match up, and it's kind of jagged looking. All we're going to do is just trim so it matches on each side and it has a nice curve to it. And now we need to attach a waistband. So we're going to use our fifth sleeve to get the waistband out of. I want my waistband to be 4 inches. When I cut those 4-inch strips, I'm going to get, see, this is the button placket, so I'm not going to be able to use that part. But on this side, I'm going to be able to cut 2 4-inch strips, and they're going to be pretty long. And then here, I'm going to be able to cut another 4-inch strip. It'll be shorter, but I'm just going to seam those 3 strips together to get enough length. I measured the circumference of the waist of the skirt, and I need 46 inches. With these 2 strips, I don't have quite enough, but when I add this shorter strip in, I'm going to have plenty. So this is something you need to consider. If you're going to make a skirt with more sleeves, you want a fuller skirt, so you use 5 or 6 sleeves, that means the circumference of the waist is going to be larger if you use the entire sleeve like we have done here. And so you'll need to consider that when you're making your waistband. If that's the case, then you're going to need another sleeve to make more strips for your waistband. Okay, I've got my strip cut. I've sewed the waistband pieces together and pressed the seams. I used a serger. You can use a regular sewing machine. If you use a regular sewing machine, you can press your seams open, or you can press them to one side like I did with serger seams. And then we're going to attach it to the top, what is now the top of our skirt. I'm just going to, you can use pins or you can use clips. I'm going to use clips. And I'm going to loosely clip this all the way around. Now, yes, my waistband at the time is larger than the waist because I have not trimmed it. And this is my way of figuring out where to trim it. Because inevitably, if I measure it and then sew it and then start putting it on the skirt, I've measured wrong or done something. So this is the way I do it. I clip it on here all the way around. Is this extra work? Yes and no. But this is what works for me. And I'm showing you in each of my videos what works for me. If this doesn't work for you and you have a better way, you do it, by all means. Okay, now I've gotten to where they meet. I'm putting a pin in one side and that's where they're going to meet. And so I just join it like that. I'll put my pin through both of them, and that's where I'm going to seam. I sewed my waistband pieces together, and I have that pinned on. The other thing I did was turn up the edge of the other side of the waistband. I serged the ends. You don't need to do that. You just turn it up to the wrong side, just turn up a little hem, and then press the heck out of it. Press it really, really well. Now I'm going to go and sew this on, sew the waistband on to the waist of the skirt. I have right sides together, or pretty sides together, and I'm going to do that and I'll be back. Okay, I have joined my waistband to the waist of the skirt. I used about a 1/2 inch seam, and I had my stitch length on Anywhere between 2.5 and 3 is usually good for construction. And now we're ready to form the band, the waistband. We have our pressed edge that we're going to fold over, and we want it to go, see this seam line? We want it to go a little past that. And then we're going to pin it on the right side. We're going to pin in what we call the ditch. When we sew this on, when we sew this around, we're going to stitch in the ditch. This right here, where the two fabrics meet, is what we call the ditch. It's where the seam, the seam line. So we're going to pin there on the right side, and look where the pin is on this side. So on the wrong side, your waistband is overlapping that seam line just a little bit. When we pressed it, we pressed our seam allowance up into the waistband, not down at the skirt. The seam allowance was pressed up so it will be inside the waistband. And so we're just going to do that all the way around. We're ready to start stitching in the ditch to stitch the waistband onto the waist of the skirt. I put 2 pins. They're about 2 inches apart. This is where I'm going to start sewing, and this is where I'm going to stop sewing. There's going to be a gap because that's where I'm going to insert the elastic. And then after I insert the elastic, then I'll seam that up. So I'm going to put my needle manually into that ditch. I've got lots of pins in here, so I have to be really careful not to sew on a pin. I put lots of pins to hold this waistband on the other side, because we are stitching from the right side, stitching in that ditch and catching that overlap that we made when we folded it over. So we're going to take a couple of stitches. I've got my stitch length on like 2.5, 2.8. Take a couple of stitches, back stitch to set those stitches, and then sew. And you just go slow so you stay in that ditch. Now, I'm not going to have you watch the entire thing. I'll speed this up on fast forward for the playback. We're at the end. We've done a back stitch to set that stitching and clipping threads. And now, before we put the elastic in, we want to top stitch the top of that waistband. So we're going to do that now. We're just going to stitch along the edge right here along the edge of the top of the waistband. I'm using my presser foot, the edge of my presser foot, as the guide. And I'm just going to edge stitch all along the edge, the top edge of the waistband. Set my stitches, and then I'm just going to sew all the way around. We'll fast forward. All right, we've sewn all the way around. Alrighty, we're ready to put the elastic in. We have a very sophisticated tool to do that, a safety pin. The bigger the better. And I just pin the end of the elastic, and then here's our opening that we left. I'm just going to tuck the elastic under there and go all the way around. But first, I'm going to pin the other end of the elastic to the top of the waistband, so I won't inadvertently pull it through and have to start all over again. So just tuck it in there. And I like to use a wider elastic. So I have a nice wide waistband. If your waistband is more narrow, then of course you'll use a elastic that's not that wide. It's going to be your personal preference. A lot of it will depend on the amount of fabric you have available. If you have to make your waistband more narrow because you have less sleeve than you need to make a wide one, that's part of upcycling. You make adjustments because you're using manufactured clothing as your fabric. You just make adjustments as you need to. And we're almost to the end. And we'll tuck it under there. So now we have both ends, and we just need to sew those two ends together. You can look and see, so just overlap them about an inch, inch and a half. Oh, and to get the right elastic size, you just put it around your waist. And I don't add for overlap because I find the elastic will stretch while I'm getting it in there. It's going to depend on the quality of the elastic. So I just cut mine to size, to the size of my waist, and then I overlap it about an inch and a half. And then I'm just going to sew that together. You just use a straight stitch and sew a square, and then sew half, cross cattywampus, and then over to the next side. So you do a square and an X in the square, and that's how you sew that together. And then once you get that sewn together, you'll stretch out your waistband so it all goes underneath, and then you'll sew the opening closed. Well, there you go. I modeled it for you and everything. And you know, that is a fun project, so I hope you'll try it. I want to encourage you to like and share this video and to subscribe to my YouTube channel. And next to the subscribe button is the little bell. Push that, and whenever I make a new video, you'll be notified. And I'll see you next time. Stay safe.